Good morning, Raven. Our colleagues are most delighted that you have decided to consider our request for assistance in helping to resolve this question that has even divided the intelligence community regarding the proximal origins of this novel virus. A successful design logically starts with a thorough understanding of the etiology of the target virus, which appears in this case to be quite singular, and, to assist your efforts, we have had our analysts comb the open source environment to provide you some foundational knowledge to assist in developing a realistic doctrinal threat model for your red team planning. Beginning with the most basic knowledge, as you know, as many as 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists had been dispatched to China by World Public Health authorities, and, by late February 2020, they had determined that the COVID-19 virus has a genome identity of 96% to a bat SARS-like coronavirus, specifically RATG13, associated with the Rhinophilus affinis horseshoe bat, and in 86% to 92% to a pangolin SARS-like coronavirus, a long snout, and eating mammal sold illegally for use in traditional Chinese medicine, from which they had tentatively determined that an animal source for COVID-19 is highly likely. However, George Gao, the former Chinese CDC director, had later determined that neither bats nor pangolins had been sold at the Wuhan market during the time of the outbreak. Moreover, pangolins present their own unique concerns as a potential intermediary source, because while there are an abundance of pangolins in South Asian countries, scientists have found, to date, only 2 SARS-CoV-2 strains, identified as MPCOV-GX, and isolated in the vicinity of Guangxi and Guangdong. However, it remains unclear whether these viruses have much potential cause disease in other animals for a spillover, or whether they pose any transmission risk to humans at all. While MPCOV-GX can potentially utilize the angiotensin-converting enzyme 2, or ACE2, from humans for cell entry and infect cell lines derived from humans, this particular SARS-CoV-2 virus from pangolins has at least some potential for interspecies infection, but its pathogenicity is quite mild, and, hence, not likely to have been the proximal origin of a lethal pandemic had a spillover sprung from that potential intermediary source. You will note that any spillover discussion occurring between species is focused upon specific interactions in what is referred to as the recombinant binding domain, or RBD, and, for spillover to humans, generally focused upon this interaction with the ACE2 enzyme. Permit me to explain this further, Raven. For simplicity purposes, consider the fact that the viruses are, by far, the most abundant biological entities on our planet, and viruses had first been discovered independently in 1892, with regard to tobacco virus, a plant virus, and in 1898, with regard to the mosaic virus, associated with hoof and mouth disease, an animal virus. Generally, we do not consider spillover events, as in zoonosis, occurring between plant species and animal species, and in no instance amongst the only 219 viruses that had presented a threat to mankind before the emergence of this recent novel coronavirus, not even one had involved a spillover from a plant source to a human. It is highly unlikely, therefore, that a human might find any virus threats arising from contact with infected plants, because the physiology of plants and their RNA and DNA are quite distinct from animal physiology, creating a type of natural immunity. Similarly, to facilitate a spillover event between animal species, the virus must possess the ability to engage, often termed as passaging to the host cell in the other species to enable a spillover event, or zoonosis, and, for coronaviruses, this would occur during this engagement with the ACE2 enzyme in the RBD. Logically, such a change in this engagement transaction to enable a spillover to another species would be a gain of function that would not present a new threat to the coronavirus reservoir that had spilled over to a new species host, and, hence, despite even the genetic diversity of coronaviruses amongst bats, For instance, it has been well accepted in the scientific community since 2005 that these passaging events resulting in zoonosis tend to be unidirectional, which may come as quite a surprise to those who do not possess this understanding of viruses and infectious disease transmission.
Prior to 2013, it was found that, despite the rapid accumulation of bat CoV sequences in the last decade, there had been no report of successful virus isolation. However, by 2005, it was known, at least in the scientific community, that SARS-CoV has a unique set of ORFs not shared by any of the other coronaviruses, and like SARS-CoV-2. While a bat coronavirus appears to be the original source for the outbreak, an intermediary source has yet to be determined, a similar finding for other SARS, like coronaviruses or SL-CoV versus, presenting quite an anomaly. Most intriguing for these SL-CoV versus, they all appear to have some unexplained connection to the vicinity of the Yunnan province, where there is an abundance of bats to serve as reservoirs. But also it is the location of the Yunnan Institute of Endemic Diseases Control and Prevention, Dali, China, a military-grade virology institute rarely, if ever, discussed even in the press.
As you know, there are over 3,000 types of coronaviruses that infect mammalian species, and over 3,000 types that infect avian species, but these coronaviruses, generally the largest in genome mass, had not been first detected or filtered until 1932, around the time of the discovery of electron microscopy, and this coronavirus, which had caused a fatal strain of avian bronchitis, had not been isolated and positively identified until 1936, while the first human coronavirus, OC229E, was not discovered until 1965, a marginal infecting agent within the common cold, which appeared to researchers contemporaneously to resemble a chicken coronavirus. And it was not until the emergence of SARS, the second coronavirus identified to be a threat to mankind, in 2003, that the threat from bat CO versus became identified, giving rise to literally a Big Bang, for by 2005 as many as 5 new human coronaviruses had emerged, all at least remotely related to bat coronaviruses circulating in the vicinity of the Yunnan province, and today, the 4 other new human coronaviruses comprise up to 30% of our common cold, a $40 billion per year industry in the US alone. Hence, from only now a total of 7 known human coronaviruses, 6 have some connections to bat coronaviruses circulating amongst bat reservoirs not in Wuhan, but Yunnan, including SARS-CoV-2, the biological agent that has been attributed to causing the disease, COVID-19, from which over 7 million persons worldwide have been reported to have succumbed. And, defying the law of large numbers and expectations from probability, from the most abundant biological particles in the world, and only 219 virus threats to mankind before the emergence of this novel virus, attributed to almost 1.2 million American fatalities, as many as 5, and now 6, new coronavirus threats appear to have found at least remote origins not in Wuhan, but in Yunnan. Also the location of the Mojiao miners infections in 2012, the same years of the emergence of MERS, which had found, apparently, an intermediary source in dromedary camels on the Arabian Peninsula. It is of note that not even the CDC has yet to have identified even one camel handler who had been infected by MERS, which had almost exclusively, like SARS, presented in nosocomial or hospital settings, with no wider community spread, and all of which appear to require an extended exposure to the virus. Getting the virus, in its most simple formulaic expression, is a function of coming into contact with the virus, how much is being shed, and the amount of virus particles transmitted to deliver an infectious dose. However, to date, the infectious dose for COVID-19 remains officially unknown, despite the fact that the science community has been well aware how to readily obtain this metric of risk since 1870, when Robert Koch had developed Koch's postulates, performing the how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop test. Related to Koch's postulates, researchers from the CDC had determined that viable samples of the novel virus had been recovered out to 17 days after the cabins had been evacuated aboard the Diamond Princess, a luxury cruise ship that had experienced an outbreak early during the emergence of COVID-19. This extended period for recovery presents yet another anomaly, because no viable samples have been extracted during nasopharyngeal swabs for half that period of viability, suggesting that the viable samples recovered from the cruise ship had not been spread by a human shedding event, but rather some unknown source aboard the cruise ship, while some degrading in potential must reasonably occur upon interaction with the human host so as to reduce the length of its viability. And under the rule articulated in Fletcher v. Rylands, accepted as the law in most American courts and jurisdictions, Fletcher v. Rylands, now accepted in most American courts and jurisdictions, if a person brings, or accumulates, on his land anything which, if it should escape, may cause damage to his neighbor, he does so at his own peril, because if it does escape, and cause damage, he is strictly liable for all harms and responsible, however careful he may have been, and whatever precautions he may have taken to prevent the damage. On similar facts, one tribunal considering crimes against humanity had concluded that the excuse given by the accused in his evidence, that all he did was pass on a message which he received from Krakow, is not plausible, concluding that undoubtedly he knew the value of detail about administration of tonics, to which he put his signature.
This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest. This has been a Film Ways presentation, darling.
And y'all go back now. Yeah.